Should just be one little more second here. Boy, is it acting weird. We're recording and we're live on YouTube. Hey everybody, how we doing? I'm glad you're going to be watching this at home. And I know a lot of you don't watch these interviews when they're happening, but that's okay. It doesn't matter whenever you watch them and whatever you're wearing. Just please don't tell the old lady what you're wearing. So these interviews on Comic Spot were started mostly because I want all of you at home to know who comedians are, whether they're brand new, a year in the biz, 20, 30, 40. You want to get to know comedians when they do interviews and they're off stage and they're not putting on a show, when they're being real. Because then you'll see if you like and connect with them. And then if you, like today, we have Kevin Stevens over there waiting for me to shut up. And when you're getting to know Kevin, for instance, today, you're going to connect on some level with him. And then you'll say, all right, well, now I'm interested. I'm attracted to who he is as a human. And he seemed funny with some of his answers. So let me go and catch some of his comedy. And your likelihood of coming away from the comedy club happy with the comedian you paid money for, you paid to have a babysitter, you paid to park, you paid to get in the club, you had to buy a couple drinks usually, and you're going to come away happy. You're welcome. So sit back and watch the blinking lights while Kevin and I talk about his life and what all he's done on stage so that you can get to know him. So let me read you the intro that Kevin Stevens, my guest today, sent to me. He sent me a picture and I couldn't get it up on social media, so you get to see him live. It's better, right? All right. Let me read its intro to you. And by the way, I'm terrible at introductions. Most people come onto the show to hear me mess up the introductions and laugh. I mess up intros. So I just don't know when and where I'm going to mess up, but just get ready. Okay. Kevin Stevens is a stand-up comic who has been on the scene here in Vegas for about 2 years. A veteran theater performer, he moved out here to compete. Hold on, it moved on me. To complete a master's degree at UNLV in 2020. When not doing stand-up, he teaches voice. I need help. And movement. Yeah, I need that. And works as fight choreographer and intimacy director. We got questions. His comedy tends to focus on the LGBTQ experience and waspy East Coast upbringing. You can catch him around town for the rest of the summer before he heads back to New York this coming fall. Wait a minute! You're leaving Vegas?
I am. I am headed back to New York for a little bit. One of the things that I talk about in my comedy is being in a long distance relationship. So when I moved out here in 2020, my partner stayed back in New York City. And so it's time for us to sort of rejoin, reconnect, and then figure out where we're going to go from there.
Yes, you had told me that, but it caught me off guard today. I didn't remember it. Don't get old. Yes, absolutely. You've been one of the delights in the comedy scene. I've gotten to see you blossom right in front of my very eyes because I've been coming to Wise Guys the same amount of time that you have. And it's amazing because I know that you first came to Wise Guys in a group of performers that were doing things. And I didn't know what it was, but you guys got up on stage and really pissed me off because you're all good. You were stage performers. And that's an interesting scenario because on the one hand, when you have stage background and you bring comedy, you come into comedy, you have that advantage. But then sometimes you have to reel back the performance art and let the comedy come forward. So do you want to speak a little bit about that? Because you've adjusted really well, very fast.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd love to. So that group that you mentioned was my MFA cohort. We actually took a class in stand-up as part of our second year in our MFAs, which is very unique to the program. And it taught us a lot about ourselves and finding our voice. I never really considered stand-up comedy before that class, and then I just fell in love with it um, because it really let me find my own creative voice. I'm so used to performing other people's work. This gave me a chance to really focus on what I wanted to say and what I wanted to bring to the table. And so that was just really exciting. And because we are so used to working with scripts, we got very good at the writing element of it. But then you're right, getting up on stage, you have to be open to how the audience reacts, to let it breathe, to let things sit, to hold the silences, to allow for laughs and things like that. And how, when you write a script, you know exactly how you want to do it, and you have to be willing to let that go and just ease up into it. And so that actually has been quite like the learning process over the last couple of years. And it's been wonderful in this particular community of stand-ups because it's a really supportive group. Vegas is, I would recommend any young stand-up comic come out to Vegas and do some time here just because there's so much opportunity to get up on stage and practice your stuff and fall on your face and get back up and adjust things. Yeah.
Yes, I know that when you first came, and there must have been 4 or 5 other people in your class that came to comedy. And I know Skylar Shock, God bless her, she just took right off and went into
Yeah.
the ozone layer. And now it's your time. I'm seeing you shine.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. It's easier to do now that the master's degree is done. I have it. So that's done. And now I can focus on other things. And comedy was at the top of my priority list. I just really, really want to put myself out there and yeah, get that experience.
So you've been out there getting to know some of the comedians, and comedians are different than actors. So can you speak a little bit to the difference that you've noticed, like a little bit of now's your chance to do a little bit of improv about the difference between those that are actors and improv artists and those that are comedians. What have you noticed?
Um, I actually admit that there's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of similarities between this group because everyone is out there to, you know, to do their art, their version of it, because comedians are artists at the end of the day. And I think the major difference is that it relies so much on your personal brand. It's a lot about knowing who you are and putting your perspective and your spin on everything. Skylar and I actually have conversations about this all the time, especially back in the beginning about like, what is our brand? What is the perspective that we bring to our comedy? She always jokes that, her brand is basic bitch. My brand is gay wasp. Like, so everything I do has that sort of spin on it. And it's been really liberating. Because I think that that's, as an actor personally, that's something that I don't get to play on stage very often, if ever. So I get to bring that little spark of myself to this. And I would say that that's something that comedians do in general, is finding that spark of their personality that really does connect and blowing that up and focusing on that.
I love that. So when you're in the audience, say it wise, guys, and there's 55 comedians going up doing 3 minutes of material each, and you're sitting there with the knowledge of improv and acting, and you see them performing straight up comedy, how many times in a night do you think, boy, that guy could sure, or that lady could sure use some improv ability? I think that
it comes up a couple times a night. I think the thing that really stands out to me when I'm watching though is I listen to the writing. And like there are times when like you just hear the quality of the joke and the build and the setup and the punch. And that comes through more than anything else. So I think sometimes when I'm sitting there, it's like, oh, I wish that was so well written. I wish that it had landed better. And I think that's where the improv comes in. That's actually why I record everything I do. I don't do it to post. I do it so that I can go back and watch and listen to the audience reactions. So I know that, like, oh, I need to play with this moment. I need to do a little bit more improv and play with how this joke lands with the audience.
Talk to me a little bit about that. That is a nugget that you dropped something that could be expanded on. So you hear somebody tell a joke and you're thinking to yourself, that could have been, that's so well written if only he had some skills, or if only he used a little bit of, talk to me about that. Like,
Well,
take a joke.
Uh, oftentimes it's just about a pause, taking that like dramatic pause before you land that punchline. I'm working on this set right now. I think you heard it at Wise Guys the other day, but it's a lot about like the CrossFit community and like doing double entendre and innuendo and things like that. A lot of my comedy, I think, as you know, is very blue, but I don't use like a lot of dirty words. It's all about implications and double entendre, which I like to play with. That just brings me joy, so I use it. But I open the set with what is the line? It's okay. So there's this stereotype that gay men love having sex at the gym, and I just have to say that that is 100% absolutely true. And I get a laugh every time, and I think that it it's because of the delivery of it. It's if I didn't take that pause, if I didn't have an inflection change, like that was something that took me a second to figure out, and it works. It gets the laugh, even if the crowd isn't that into me. There's something about the mechanics of the humor that work. So it's stuff like that. There's
Thank you.
comedy is
That's
very
a great
technical.
example. What do you do? Like, you're an improv, you know, you're a veteran of improv and acting. So you get up on stage and you are 2 years into this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're 2 years in and you're on stage doing comedy. And you know that you have this set list and these are your jokes, and then something goes awry. The waitress drops a tray, TC Morgan won't sit down and shut up, whatever. And so, like, how often do you bring that kind of improv to elevate what you're doing, or do you shy away from that and stick with your script?
I'm beginning to play more and more with that. I do want to use that more, but at places like Wise Guys, 3 minutes is a very short amount of time. So I think that oftentimes crowd work could just eat away at that. And if you're trying to hone a certain piece that you brought in for the evening, then that's sort of the priority there. I do play with it a little bit more at like the longer open mics, like the 5 and 7 minutes, just to sort of see where banter is appropriate. Yeah, I would definitely bring it in though. It just depends on the location and how I'm connecting with the crowd that night. Sometimes if it's a more hostile crowd, because I have a very particular flavor of comedy, not everyone's gonna like it, and that's okay. Sometimes those are you learn more from those crowds oftentimes than you do with the crowds that agree with you and tell you that you're funny, because you have to work harder. But I think those crowds I might not play with as much because they're not feeling me. So yeah.
Yeah. So I went to Nashville, and before the mic started, it was a 5-minute mic. Before the mic started, there was a picture of a black guy on the wall who's the host of the open mic. And in walked a black guy with the same hairdo, so I thought it was the host of the mic. And I, the white person in that's out of towner, brand new at the mic, got two black guys mixed up. And word of that spread through the open mic before the open mic started. And I'm surprised they laughed at anything I said, because in their minds, they probably weren't real settled with me doing that. Or did I clean that up? You know, did I go around and let people know that was just a mistake I made? But the first, I said, are you, I asked the first guy if he was the guy in the poster, and he didn't take it so well, but the host, anything goes, Have you ever done something like you say that your material is blue and not everybody is on board with the WASPy LGBTQ comedian. So, and what have you done before, during, or after a show to bring people on board?
I generally try to, I flip my script a little bit. I switch to other jokes. I do have other things back up. So maybe I'll just change what my set was going to be for that evening. Because you know this from experience. Once you have, 7 or 8 3-minute pieces, you can sort of puzzle piece everything and change things around. Um, I did that actually. I was at an open mic last week, and the comic that went on right before me turned on the feature and started commenting on the feature performer who had gone up a little while before, and the audience had loved the feature. So this particular comic sort of turned the crowd, and I went on right after her. And it was a very silent room for the first little bit. And I managed to get them back on board by the end, but 5 minutes isn't a long time to turn a crowd back around.
Yeah.
So it took a little finagling.
So when you've gotten off stage, has the next comedian ever made snide remarks that they shouldn't have made about your set that is blue and edgy in a tasteful way? But have they ever come across like not woke about your material?
No, actually, that I've not encountered that from the comics. I mean,
Yeah.
I've heard stuff at Wise Guys, like just because like you never know who's going to come in. A lot of them aren't professional comics. Some of them might be trying stuff for the very first time, which I love about Wise Guys. I love that they just let people get up there and try their hand at this to see if they might want to do it. But I've never heard any of that directed at me. I mean, oftentimes the host will poke fun at me, but that's all fun and games, and we do it all the time, and it oftentimes gives us something to play with. I was at an open mic actually last night, and the first comedian walked off stage, and he walked past me, and he was like, "Dude, you look like a supermodel or a Swedish serial killer. I can't tell which." And I used that as my opening bit when I got up on stage, and it was just like, oh my God, the lighting in here is amazing. I went from gay southerner to Swedish superhero. I jumped like 20 rungs. It's great. Serial killer.
Oh, that's so fabulous.
Yeah.
How did that
Yeah.
go over?
Great. The audience seemed to really enjoy it.
That's amazing. I love those kind of, sometimes I get some of my best material from how someone roasts me after my set, and then I ask them if I can have that material.
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
Last
I think that's
night
actually where a lot of the improv comes in. You got to be willing to roll with those punches and use it.
Yeah. Well, you have an interesting take on what improv is. So in my mind, I got to tell you, I'm not all that improv-y knowledgeable. And I assumed, and you know what they say about assuming, I assumed that improv was just one layer. It was only what you could differentiate, go off script when you're in the middle of your set. But you brought up something interesting, how you use improv in different ways. So maybe like enlighten me about, it's not just like you can use improv to change up your script. You can use improv, like open up the possibilities for us comedians that don't know a lot about improv.
I think a lot of us improv just naturally, just as you're trying to find your way through your own script. I think the best thing about improv, what I love to play with, is just how do I deliver this line? Where do I have the pauses? Where do I have the breath? There's so many different tools that you can throw in and switch up. So the script stays the same, but there are so many varieties of ways to deliver a line, and you're eventually going to find the one that lands every single time you do it in a very particular way. And I think that that requires improv and the freedom to switch things up in order to find that. I think it's very rare that we read something from the page in front of an audience for the very first time and you go, yep, that's the one. That's how I do it. Yeah.
So I have a question for you. I'm a real fan of Seth Meyers when he does his monologues. I mean, we could talk about other things he does, but just when he's like on his show doing the monologue. And I'll tell you why I like it. And Saturday Night Live Weekend Update when they're doing their jokes and it's live and something that they thought was going to go over flops. And then when they improv to bring it back. So, can we talk a little bit about how improv can be utilized for when the crowd didn't like the joke or the joke you tried didn't work this time, and what things you can say after that will get them to laugh that are classy? I see a lot of people doing standard lines, but how can you as an improv comedian use the moment and your creativity to use something very unique, not just a standard, well, that worked in a nursing home?
Right. I think that that's just all about active listening. That's about sort of leaning into the swerve. There's that age old like improv thing about yes anding. So never deny anything, never shy away from it, lean into it, even if it crashes the car, lean into that swerve. Because actually that's the only way that you learn as well. And I will say that like that is something that I am currently still working on is my crowd work and how exactly to do that. Because as I said, I before comedy, I was really doing mostly scripted work. I don't have a big background in like sketch improv or anything like that, where it does train that particular muscle a little bit more. So I'm in the process of climbing that rung.
So you're a veteran actor, not you don't call yourself a veteran improv. So I had that backwards. So
Yeah.
talk to us about your acting.
Oh, I've been doing it for many, many years. I took a couple years off in the middle and went and actually worked in social work for a couple years. But I went to school for acting and for my undergraduate years, and then I acted in Chicago for a long time, and then went to DC and worked at the Shakespeare Theater in DC. And that was when I took my hiatus and went up to New York, and was actually running volunteer recruitment for the city suicide hotline. And that taught me more than anything about active listening and responding to stuff in the moment, which I think helped my acting and now my comedy more than anything, just as a useful life skill.
That that is right there is a hilarious premise.
Whew. It can be funny. We signed so many NDAs, it's ridiculous. But yeah, HIPAA and all of that. But that said, you're right. It is really funny, and I think I had to have distance from it, so I will probably start using that in my comedy at some point. Um, but then after that, I got back into acting again. Was acting in New York, and uh, the pandemic hit, and it seemed like a good time to go back to graduate school and get my master's degree. So I just finished up my master's of fine arts.
What are some of your favorite acting roles that you've gotten?
God, let's see. I actually did this show right out of college that I loved. It was called Letters Home. It was out of the Griffin Theater in Chicago, and we would mount it every Memorial Day and every Veterans Day for about 3 weeks and do a tour around the country to various places. And it was all letters written by soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it was one of the most meaningful things that I think I've done, just because I grew up in a military family. We moved every 3 years. We were stationed overseas for 7. Um, and to sort of tell these stories. And I remember at one point we took the show to Fort Drum, New York, which was at that time, it was the most deployed base in the country. And I lived there when I was little, like when I was like 2, 3. My parents were stationed there. So to bring this school, we were actually doing it in schools because the military population there is so huge that literally 50% of their public school system were military kids. And these kids were dealing with parents that were away for 8 or 9 months at a time, back with leave and back out there again. And they were having a really hard time coping, and their classmates didn't understand. So they brought us in to do the show to sort of bridge that gap. And God, the amount of tears in that auditorium, it was just, and then we got to talk to the kids afterwards, and I got to share my experience growing up as a military brat. And that was yeah, it was just an incredible experience. So I think that was probably probably my most favorite role to date. And then there are like the flashy ones. I got to play Oberon in A Midsummer Night's Dream last year. Um, I got to do a weird show, not a weird show, but a show that nobody knows called The Bow Stratagem. It's an old 1700s play, but it had a lot of sword fighting and swashbuckling, which is one of the other things that I do. So that was fun.
Nice. So what are your life goals from here?
From here, so as I said, I'm headed back to New York, and it's to use all of the skills that I have accumulated in grad school and here in this community to sort of pick out my life as an actor. And stand-up comedy is going to be a big part of that. What I love about stand-up comedy is that it really is the thing that's me. I don't really, I've got friends like Skylar writes short movies and gets them filmed and things like that, and like she's got that path. That was never really my goal. I don't mind being in other people's works, but with stand-up comedy, I found my voice. This is my creative outlet. So this is just me getting up there and making people laugh. So that'll be a huge part of it, for sure. And then doing the whole, audition circuit. I do voiceover, and I do really like I don't want to go back to teaching immediately, but I could see myself doing that eventually and sharing just what I know about voice and movement and eventually maybe even comedy. Who knows?
Absolutely. I can't wait to hear how New York treats you when you get back there. And you're leaving here, the Vegas scene when?
Uh, Not exactly set yet, but probably last week of July, first week of August. And then I'll probably road trip and try to hit open mics all across the South on my way back to South Carolina, where I'll do some time with some family and drop into mics around there. And then I'll land in New York by September.
Absolutely. And you're good enough to get booked on shows.
Uh, let's hope so. I mean, I like to think so. But I have to reach out. I have to like plan my path and then reach out to the clubs along the way. There's that now I think that after 2 years, I finally have enough material to really merit that. So now it's about reaching out and learning about the marketing side of this and all of that, which I'm looking forward to.
Before you go, maybe you can get Wise Guys to let you do a couple guest spots.
I will reach out for sure.
You would be so fabulous doing guest spots for big shows.
I would love that. Yeah, there's a couple places in town that I want to reach out to. My mentor in grad school for comedy was Jason Outlaw, who you might know from the scene here in Vegas. So I learned so much from him. So I'll definitely be going back to him. It's always good to have a mentor, I think, in these situations. Yeah.
Absolutely. They'll guide you and save you a lot of trouble. But what we didn't cover, and I was remiss, but I'm going to do it now because people know I'm old and I have a brain injury. So I'm going to do this backwards. We didn't cover your youth, and I love to know who people were growing up. So will you please tell people what you were like when you were a little kid in your home and in school? Let us picture that.
Oh God, I was a chubby little thing. I was a nerd. I was a total nerd. And I loved it. I can't complain. But it was cool too. I think that I loved having that I mentioned that I was a military brat. And so we moved every 3 to 4 years for the first 15 years of my life. I came in halfway through my dad's 30-year career. So we lived in Virginia, then Georgia, then upstate New York, then back to Virginia. And when I say Virginia, I mean Washington, D.C. Like he usually worked at the Pentagon. And then we moved to Australia for 3 years. And I was very much an outsider there. But it was fun. It's actually funny. I meet a lot of Australians. There's a big Australian population here in Vegas. And they're always like, where'd you grow up? And I was like, well, Canberra, which is the capital, but nobody knows it. And every time I tell it to an Australian, their first response is, oh, I'm so sorry. Because there's nothing there. There's nothing there except the government. but I was ages 7 to 10, so there was really nothing for me to do except go to school and play in the yard and all of that. So I didn't know either way. And then from there, we moved to France, and I lived in Paris for 4 years. And
Is your
that
dad a
was,
diplomat?
he was technically in Australia. He was the military attaché, but no, he was a colonel in the army, and so he was sent to Australia in a diplomatic role as the army attaché, and then in Paris he was a liaison officer between the French and American militaries, and so he worked at the École Militaire in Paris, and that was just amazing. We were there for the millennium, which was cool. Um, and I just like I think that's where like my true nerddom really set in because I'm a big history buff as you turn into when it's everywhere around you. Um, so I love that. And then I mentioned in my stand-up comedy, I make jokes about how I went to boarding school. So I came back to the States and went to boarding school right outside of DC. Very, very southern boarding school. It was a big change of pace from what I had known up until that time. Yeah, and then after that, let's see, after that, and that was actually where I started dancing. I started like really getting into theater and the performing arts. The performing arts have always been a part of my life because that was what I used to sort of ground myself whenever we moved. And like you have to give up your entire friend group and all of that. You get really good at saying goodbye and sort of moving on, letting go of things. But at each place, the theater community is one of the most welcoming and open armed communities that you can have. So I just dive in, start doing plays, start doing stuff with these groups. And in high school was really where I cemented that that was what I wanted to do with my life. And then moved to Chicago for college. And then sort of bounced between Chicago, New York, and DC for all of the years before I moved out here to Vegas. That's sort of
Wonderful.
me in a nutshell.
That's awesome. Now you're going to be going back to New York to be with your husband,
Partner.
spouse, husband. Okay, I wanted to get that. I'm
Partner.
What?
Partner. We're not married yet.
Partner.
Yeah.
So how long have you had your partner as your partner?
8 years.
And you've made it
Yeah.
work long distance and with all your career. What kind of career does he have in general?
He is also an actor, more film. He's gotten into sort of writing and producing and creating his own stuff. But during the pandemic, he sort of discovered this, not discovered, he knew he could do it, but he's an artist. He grew up being a visual artist as well. And he sort of put down his paintbrush for about 10 years and picked it back up during the pandemic to sort of do some, everyone was in quarantine. We were just all trying to stay sane. So he gave himself this creative art project and it actually turned into a business. And so now like his artwork has really taken off. And he's doing very well for himself in New York. So.
What type of artwork is it? He
does oil pastels and mostly landscape. He does landscape. But he takes on various projects. Like he just did a series of plates or illustrations for Christmas Carol and actually just got a publisher to pick it up. So they're going to read next, I think it's for Christmas 2024. They're going to release a special edition of the Christmas Carol with all of his illustrations in it.
That's fabulous. Will you shoot me some of the stuff as it comes up so I can share it?
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, he's already got, I'll send you his Instagram page after this. It's like his artwork is beautiful.
I'd love to see that. I painted a pastel, hold on, floral, like a landscape. There's a flaw in the middle. That's a lamp that I have. The lamp is just for my lighting. But yeah, I love pastels and I love, seascapes and landscapes and mountains. You can do mountains with pastels.
Mm-hmm. Yep, a couple of his pieces are very mountain focused.
Oh, wow. Well, where would you like people to follow you on social media and where can they catch your comedy that you want them to see?
Well, for the next couple months, I'll be hitting up most of the open mics here in town. So Square Bar, Wise Guys, Noreen's, Ocho Tai, if you're a late night person. And then I'll continue to post on my Instagram account, which is at Kev Mick Stev, because it's Kevin McDowell Stevens, so Kev Mick Stev. And just as things come up, because I'm going to try to be booking stuff and we'll see what happens, and I will keep everyone updated.
Absolutely. Well, when you travel from here through the southern route to New York, let me know what cities you're going to be in. I've interviewed a lot of people, so I might be able to send you names if you're looking for more names to get booked along the way.
Thank you. Yeah, for sure. I know that we'll definitely be hitting up Phoenix and Austin. So, yeah, I'll be in touch for sure.
Okay, perfect. Well, you're definitely worth getting booked on shows. You're at that level. So whether that's, hosting or a shorter feature scenario or hosting or opening, just go for it because that's where you're at. You're there, dude. You're there.
Thank you, Linda.
Yes. And I'm gonna let you go and I'll put this on my YouTube. Comedian Linda Marcus Smith. It's up there, but it'll finalize and then I'll share it if you'll share it too.
I will definitely share it. Cool. Thank you so much, Linda, for having me.
Yes, thanks for coming. Kevin Stevens, you guys. Tell them again your Instagram.
So it's Kevin Stevens, which is at Kev Mick Stev. So it's KEVMCSTEV. Kev Mick Stev.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and I'll see you back out there.